So I trained as a lawyer, so at the same time the last couple of years that I was working at the Sunday Telegraph on Saturdays in the office amongst all the journalists, and I finished trained as a lawyer, worked as a lawyer for a while, but then decided that journalism seemed like a lot more fun. So I decided to change over and do that instead. The last couple of years I worked as executive editor of the Herald and the Age, and I ran a large project to change the newsroom and how it operated to make sure it was better suited for providing all the content for the digital platforms. So they're the two major roles in terms of a manager, but otherwise I was a reporter for a long time too, so covering business and politics. Yeah, look, I was quite lucky from a lot of other roles that I'd had. I was often doing roles where I was a journalist in terms of writing, but also managing staff and editing other people's content and preparing ideas of articles that needed to be done. So a mixture there, and those type of roles, because I had a mixture, I didn't specialise just in being a reporter. So by the time I was running a financial review, I was managing 300 staff and a lot of complexity because it was the newspaper, it was the digital sites, it was several magazines, a lot of people reporting to me, and a lot of staff to look after and give ideas to and listen to and hopefully help them in the journalism they were doing. Once the World Wide Web, as it was then called, came in and the internet came in, just the acceleration of change in the last 20 years has been unbelievable in terms of the challenges that journalists face in providing content across so many platforms and channels. You know, there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no WhatsApp, but now as a journalist, you've got to be across all those different platforms where the content is appearing on. So it's just a really dramatic change. So everyone that's moving into communications now is at the first part of a wave of change in media, and no one's quite sure what it's going to look like in 5 years, let alone 10 years. I mean, Facebook was unheard of 10 years ago. Look, I think the key thing is not to specialise too much. I think these days people who got into journalism course think, hey, I just want to be a great writer and you're invested in journalism. Well, you've got to define what that actually means. It's no longer just about the words. It's about the images, it's about the data that you put around your articles, and it's about where you put your articles and how you write them. Because what's going to be good and attract people's attention on a mobile platform is completely different than what would appear as a 4,000 word piece of journalism in the New York Times or the Sydney Morning Herald. Repackaging your content and making sure you've got images and video and know how to do all that, that's the great skills that journalists are going to evolve. You can no longer just be a specialist, you have to be an all-rounder. And increasingly, because information is so freely available, you've got to be a great researcher. You've got to come up with your own unique ideas, and because the access to information that everyone has is so much more advanced than what it was 20 years ago. Look, I think the work environments can vary. I mean, they're pretty tough and uncompromising when it's daily news, for example, because you're competing with so many other news sources for the information. But if it's a role where it's a magazine or which is not quite news orientated, it's probably not quite as difficult. But in terms of whether the work environments are nurturing, that'll depend on the newsrooms. A lot of them it's very much sink or swim. You've got to come up with your own ideas and very much be an individual what you're doing. But realistically, the environments I've worked in, the best work environments are collaborative, where people are working with each other. So being collaborative and working with people is probably the best skill, because that's a good skill to know even in a hard, competitive, uncompromising newsroom. Look, I think the future is quite exciting because there's so many more organisations who are moving in the media space. I mean, who would have thought 5 years ago that BuzzFeed would become one of the main sources of journalism? I mean, in the last couple of weeks it's interviewed Barack Obama and Cameron, the UK Prime Minister. No one would have thought that could have happened, and the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Telegraph in London were horrified that a new media group with young people running it could get interviews with those type of people. So any journalist has to be conscious of what's changing in terms of the digital platforms that are available. And the fact is that any group of journalists these days could go out and start their own news media group, because all the technology's there. WordPress is there, which is being used by media groups. So anyone can be a journalist these days. That's probably the most significant change I've seen in 30 years. You don't have to rely on 3 or 4 media groups job. There's a lot of choice out there for people.